one in which he would be president. A continent with one army, one passport, one currency, called the Afro.
Did you know Africans have always wanted to be united? In the latter part of the 1990s, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi began to spread his idea of an integrated Africa. African politicians were moved by his ideas, which ultimately resulted in the formation of the African Union. By the 1990s, the Body of African Unity, or AU, a body composed of nearly all African states, was not yielding meaningful outcomes. Though progress was modest, the OAU had been attempting to promote political and economic unification among its members. It wasn't until Muammar Gaddafi became the OAU's leader in 1998 that plans to restructure it began to take shape. Through his proposal, African unity was effectively restored as a major priority. Gaddafi is known for being a divisive person. His suspected involvement in the bombing of buildings and airplanes, as well as his backing for organizations that many countries view as terrorist organizations, have damaged his reputation. It is often overlooked that Gaddafi was also a visionary leader who could rally influential people to support his objectives. He defied the world's superpowers and stood with marginalized nations and peoples. As a leader, he was highly regarded by many, especially in Africa. From 1969 to 2011, Muammar Gaddafi, a politician and military commander, led Libya as the country's de facto leader. There was a military takeover in Libya in 1969 and Colonel Gaddafi took control. Following the overthrow of the monarchy, he announced the creation of the Libyan Arab Republic, which was fashioned along his own revolutionary principles. Libya's abundant oil reserves enabled Gaddafi to create a welfare state and make his nation the richest in Africa. Many Libyans still remember the time during Gaddafi's rule favorably. Globally, Gaddafi was largely viewed as a staunch opponent of the status quo who disobeyed authority. Because of this, when demonstrations against Gaddafi's authority began in 2011, few nations backed him. Libyans in the eastern region of Cyrenaica took to the streets in February 2011 amid the Arab Spring. When Libya's security forces failed to quell the protests, people across the nation rose up in rebellion. Following this, government forces started to retake territory that had been held by rebels. As words circulated that there were large numbers of civilian casualties, the UN called a conference. The UN approved all required actions to safeguard civilians and regions populated by civilians after voting on whether or not to intervene. Approved, a coalition headed by Nato intervened in Libya, quickly routing Gaddafi's army. Rebels halted Gaddafi's military convoy as he tried to escape the nation, ultimately resulting in the Libyan leader's death. From the beginning of his administration in 1969, Gaddafi supported Pan-Arabism, an ideology that aimed to bring the Arab nations of the Middle East and North Africa together into a unified political entity. After decades of effort, Gaddafi gave up on the cause of Arab unification in 1998. The apparent lack of unity-related advancement and the absence of political backing for Libya from Arab nations at the time, which was under international sanctions, were the causes. Due to its development of chemical and nuclear weapons, its ties to groups that many Western nations considered terrorist, like the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Irish Republican Army, as well as its involvement in the bombing of European aircraft and buildings, Libya had lost its influence on the international scene in the 1980s and 1990s. Because Libya was involved in the 1988 plane bombing that occurred over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, the UN placed sanctions on the country in 1992. As part of these punitive measures, trade restrictions and an air embargo were put into place. Few countries stood by Libya in defiance of the sanctions. It was particularly noticeable how little support there was from Arab nations. Having spent a great deal of time and money supporting the Arab cause, Gaddafi felt deceived. Gaddafi had been let down by the Arab countries and needed a fresh source of backing for his foreign strategy. He found backing among African states, who showed a readiness to buck international embargoes and aid a struggling Libya. During the 34th annual meeting of the Organization of African Unity in Burkina Faso on June 8, 1998, African leaders unanimously resolved to oppose the UN sanctions placed on Libya. During the following months, despite the air ban, the leaders of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Gambia all made the decision to visit Libya. Gaddafi said, "Africans and not Arabs are Libya's real supporters. The Arab world is over." When Arab leaders chose in September 1998 at a summit of the Arab League in Cairo not to follow the OAU in rejecting the sanctions, this was his answer. For Gaddafi, 1998 was a watershed year. He shifted his focus from the Arab cause to achieving African unification. In the past, Gaddafi had aimed to strengthen his relations with African countries. In addition to peacekeeping missions from Libya to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, he had sent diplomatic missions from Libya to resolve issues between the Sudanese government, armed opposition organizations, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. These actions enhanced Libya's reputation throughout Africa and yielded observable outcomes. Furthermore, Libya's vast oil reserves gave Gaddafi the ability to purchase influence in Africa. These improving ties, combined with a general distaste for the prevailing global system that many African nations shared, played a role in the decision of African nations not to impose sanctions on Libya. Despite Africa's assistance, UN sanctions wrecked Libya's economy. In response, the UN lifted its sanctions against Libya in April 1999, and Gaddafi turned up 2 suspects in the Lockerbie attack for trial. In July 1999, Gaddafi delivered a speech at the annual meeting of the Organization of African Unity in Algiers. He declared that an overhaul and revision of the OAU Charter from 1963 was necessary and that it was time for Africa to come together. To that end, he extended an invitation to the leaders of African states to attend a summit that he would convene in Sirte, Libya. At the summit in Sirte on September 9, 1999, Gaddafi laid forth his vision for an unbounded United States of Africa. In his vision, there would be a single administration on the continent headed by a single president, a common foreign and trade policy, and a unified armed forces. He advocated for the creation of the African Union in order to make this a reality. At Sirte, Gaddafi created the foundation for the Organization of African Unity to become the African Union. He committed to establishing new councils for the African Union, including the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, the Peace and Security Council, and the Pan-African Parliament. Praising Gaddafi's initiative in 2001, African leaders referred to him as the Son of Africa and expressed gratitude for his endeavors. Determined efforts aimed at achieving Africa's collective vision for unity, cooperation, development, peace, and security on the continent was how they continued to demonstrate their faith in him. Gaddafi's desire came true in 2002 when the African Union was founded in South Africa. To fulfill his dream of a united Africa, Gaddafi sent millions of dollars in Libyan oil revenues to the AU's operating budget. Gaddafi also paid the African Union's share of several less developed African countries in order to win support for the idea of a United States of Africa. However, shortly after the AU was founded, Gaddafi's support for his objectives and influence inside the organization began to decline, in spite of his generosity. Although Gaddafi's attempts to revive African collaboration were highly applauded, African leaders did not provide his plans for the United States of Africa the solid support they needed. Although they often professed support for Gaddafi's objectives, they never committed to seeing them through. Gaddafi never gave up on his vision of an African Union. As the years passed, he even seemed to become more unpredictable in his grand dreams. For example, he crowned himself King of Kings of Africa in 2008, before 200 traditional African kings. In 2009, Gaddafi was selected to head the African Union as a reward for his services to the organization. Gaddafi and other African leaders quarreled frequently during his chairmanship, and he could not muster enough support for a second term. During the Libyan revolution, Gaddafi resigned peacefully as a result of the African Union's advocacy for an inclusive transition. Worldwide, there was not much support for this plan. Ultimately, Nato chose to launch a military intervention that led to the leader of Libya's demise. Western countries saw Gaddafi as a threat and waited for the smallest chance to remove him. Despite his imperfections, he had a vision for Africa and Libya. In order to provide water for his people, he constructed rivers in Libya. In Libya, basic facilities were virtually free. Since Western powers used their manipulation of the populace to overthrow him, the nation has not been stable. It is time for Africans to exercise caution and wisdom so that they are not persuaded by other nations to remove capable leaders who wish to further their agendas. Though he wasn't a flawless leader, Gaddafi had noble goals for Africa and Libya that would have come at the price of the West. This clarifies their desire for him to go at all costs. Please share your thoughts about Muammar Gaddafi in the comments section below. What lessons do you think today's African leaders have learned from him? Thank you for watching, and please do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one.